counselor. We are here for our FY20 overview with BPS. This is one of probably more than 7 coming hearings with numerous topics. Today is basically the overview of the entire budget. We welcome Superintendent Pupil and her team. I'm going to first read my script here. I'd like to remind folks this is a public hearing, both being broadcast and recorded on Comcast Channel 8, RCN 82, Verizon 1964, and streamed at boston.gov/city-council-TV. I'd ask folks in the chamber to silence their electronic devices. At the conclusion of the presentation by the department and questions and answers from my colleagues, we will take public testimony. There is a sign-in sheet to my left by the door. I ask that you please state your name, any affiliation, residence, and check the box if you do wish to testify. This budget review will encompass approximately 34 hearings over roughly the next 6 weeks. We strongly encourage residents, whether here in the chamber or at home, to take a moment to engage in this process by giving testimony for the record. You can do this several ways. Come to one of the hearings and to provide public testimony. Come to the hearing dedicated to public testimony on Tuesday, June 4th, anytime from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m., and we will be here for at least that time, and we'll stay longer as we need to hear from everyone who would like to speak on the budget. You can also send your testimony to the Committee on Ways and Means, City Hall, 5th floor, Boston 02201, or email the committee at ccc.wm@boston.gov. Today's hearing is regarding dockets 0622 to 0625. Orders for the FY20 operating budget, including annual appropriations for departmental operations, annual appropriation for the school department, appropriation for other post-employment benefits, and appropriation for certain transportation and public realm improvements, as well as dockets 0626 through 0628, capital budget appropriations, including loan orders and lease purchase agreements. I'd like to introduce my colleagues in order of their arrival. My immediate left, Councilor at Large Anissa Sabi George, and Chair of Education. To my far left, Councilors Michael Flaherty, Tim McCarthy, Frank Baker, Councilor Garrison, and to my right, Councilor Lydia Edwards and Councilor Josh Zakem. So with that, I would like to turn it over to the superintendent for your opening remarks. Oh, I'm sorry, another bit of housekeeping. I have 2 letters from my colleagues who are not able to attend. Dear Chair, I regret that I am unable to attend today's hearing on the Committee on Ways and Means on the FY20 budget. My staff will be in attendance, and I look forward to reviewing the record and of this hearing. Please read this letter into the public record. Sincerely, Councilor Kim Janey. Councilor Siomo, I regret to inform you that I will be missing today's hearing on City Council's Ways and Means docket 0638 to 0640 FY20 budget overview and revolving funds in the Council INL chamber due to a personal matter. I will review the hearing online. Sincerely, Matt O'Malley. Thank you for allowing me to get that out of the way.
Thank you, Councilor. And good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank all of you for being here this afternoon and for making time for us to take this opportunity to provide you with a brief overview of the Boston Public Schools budget for fiscal year 2020. I'm going to concentrate on big themes and major strategies behind our annual budgeting process and behind the FY20 budget. And then I will turn things over to our Chief Financial Officer, Eleanor Lorentz, and her team. We will all be available to answer questions as the conversation proceeds, together with a number of members of our senior team across various departments. On March 27th, the Boston School Committee voted unanimously to approve the proposed FY20 budget, which now comes to the City Council for your review. The total proposed budget for next year is $1.139 billion, which represents an increase of $26 million from the current FY19 fiscal year. Please note that that is before the next round of collective bargaining agreements have been negotiated. So this number will increase further when we have a contract in place with our teachers. Earlier this month as well, Mayor Walsh announced an additional $15 million investment over and above the $26 million noted previously into the Quality Pre-K Fund, expanding access to Boston's nationally recognized early childhood education for 4-year-olds in both community-based and BPS classroom settings. This is also a critical investment made following the school committee vote that builds on the themes of driving the district's allocation of budgetary funds. And 4 themes really drive the BPS FY20 budget. The first is prioritizing school-based investments to continue steady progress toward our long-term goals of equity, flexibility, and stability for our schools, including $6 million of new supports in FY20. The second theme is sustaining major research-backed central investments over time. That includes the continued expansion of pre-kindergarten seats, the district's early hiring initiative and pipeline programs to attract and retain the best educators, and our ongoing investments in extended learning time that now have increased minutes in the school day in 104 of our 125 schools at an annual cost of $23 million of investment in a longer school day. Also included in this year's budget are targeted new investments, including expanding equitable access to the entrance test for the district's exam schools, strengthening family engagement, science instruction, and high school pathways. The fourth theme is further increasing transparency with the launch of a new web tool that enables additional equity analysis. And the fourth theme is continuous operational improvements to fund investments. Next year's budget directly serves students and families working to enhance teaching and learning while increasing access to quality education for students from traditionally marginalized populations. 89% of the BPS budget goes directly to schools. I want to repeat that number because I don't think it's always fully appreciated. 89% of the BPS budget goes directly to schools, with 5% allocated to central office administration and another 5% spent on state-required services and district investments for non-BPS students. Further, of that 89%, BPS aims to maximize the classroom-level impact of every dollar through the use of equity-based tools like weighted student funding, in which the dollars follow the students, and the Opportunity Index. For weighted student funding, in response to feedback, the district has extended soft landings to mitigate changes to a school's budget due to shifts in enrollment. The district began doing that last year in FY19, and we've further expanded that for FY20. In FY20, the first 2% of the decline in any school's weighted student funding, including last year's 1%, is absorbed and covered by the district to protect schools from year-to-year swings of enrollment. We understand the need for schools to have stability in their staffing and budgets, and these funds are intended to support the financial health of all schools. This year, the district also began incorporating a second equity-based allocation measure, the Opportunity Index, into weighted student funding. The Opportunity Index uses a second range of data representing factors that are outside of the school's control, but are predictive of students' academic outcomes and thus the need concentration in any one school. These include safety in a student's home neighborhood, income and education levels, and physical environment. By rolling multiple measures into a single, more accessible metric, the district is better equipped to direct resources to our schools with the greatest student need. A further equity-based organization is that we have this past year reorganized our schools into distinct support networks based on the needs of the schools and their student populations. This allows the district to concentrate centralized funds and staff capacity toward specific school improvement strategies. For example, the schools designated as turnaround schools are in the same support network, while other lower performing schools are now grouped in small networks with higher level of central office staff support. BPS also continues to work to optimize our vast transportation routing system. We recently removed 50 school buses from the streets of Boston, saving and repurposing several $1 million to make our transportation system more cost-effective and efficient. This is extremely important because the district transports nearly 30,000 students a day, with transportation for non-BPS students accounting for 21% of our transportation budget. 21% of the transportation budget is spent on non-BPS students, inclusive of charters and parochial school bus transportation. Of the remaining percentage for BPS, 40% of that transportation spending goes to required support for our students with disabilities, including door-to-door transportation and one-to-one bus monitors. Finally, this year, we've introduced a new online tool as part of our ongoing commitment to transparency and community engagement. Stakeholders can peruse individual school budgets and central allocations at bostonpublicschools.org/explore budget. The FY20 budget also includes several targeted high-impact investments, including $750 in transformation for schools needing improvement. This is in addition to a $1.3 million reserve for schools with declining enrollment, another $500,000 to enhance family engagement efforts, both in policy, training, and messaging for our Welcome Services centers, $375,000 to strengthen science instruction for grades 3 to 8, another $364,000 to expand exam school access and bring the ISEE entrance exam into the classroom and thus available to all 6th graders on a voluntary basis in fall of 2019. And finally, thanks to additional support from the mayor, BPS will be able to offer free MBTA bus and subway passes for all students in grades 7 to 12 for the coming school year. This includes students in charter, parochial, as well as all BPS students citywide. This has been something that many of our students and families have been asking for quite some time. And organizations like the Boston Student Advisory Council, Sociedad Latina, Teen Empowerment, the Mayor's Youth Council, Hyde Square Task Force, and the Boston Area Youth Organizing Project. We want to thank all of them for their advocacy and persistence. I also want to give a particular shout out to Alternatives for Community and Environment, or ACES, youth-led Roxbury Environmental Empowerment Project, who brought attention to transportation issues and spearheaded this work over a number of years. And I want to thank the mayor for helping us to make the city a classroom for even more students. Finally, in the face of declining state aid, we are grateful for the support of the City of Boston under the leadership of Mayor Walsh, who continues to increase the city's allocation to the BPS overall budget. The city is continuing to make up for reductions at the state and federal level. The city's proposed increase of $26 million for BPS and FY20 comes on top of their commitment to backfill the $12 million decline in net state aid compared to fiscal year 2019 under the governor's budget. So that's actually $38 million in elevated city funding. Mayor Walsh has increased BPS's annual budget by over $200 million since taking office. This is while Chapter 70 funding at the state level remains stagnant, increasing by only $10 million. The Commonwealth uses Chapter 70 as its primary funding source for public education. As you all know, the state's formula is 25 years old and is in desperate need of updating. And as a result of the outdated approach to state funding, Boston has experienced almost flat funding from the state for a decade. Outside of Chapter 70, Boston has struggled with consistent underfunding by the state of the charter school reimbursement line item. And despite this disinvestment in Boston by the state, the city continues to provide historic levels of funding for education. Equally important, in this past year, the mayor has been elevating this issue with our legislative partners and state policymakers, as have I, along with School Committee Chair Mike Lecanto, members of the school committee, and many members of this council as well. And I want to thank you for that advocacy. We've also been collaborating with superintendents and mayors from other cities, as this is a shared challenge faced by many communities. And finally, I want to thank a number of community groups and advocacy organizations, including our teacher union partners who have joined this effort as well. Because even while we debate here in this city how best to spend the resources we have, we collectively have a strong case to make for a more robust education funding partnership with the state to increase the size of the pie, commensurate both with the needs and aspirations of our students and their families. So that's equally important that we keep our eye on that mark, even while we talk about how best to allocate our resources here. So with that, and thank you for your attention, I will turn things over to Eleanor Lorentz to provide some additional detail.
Eleanor, let me just recognize that we've been joined when you started your presentation by both counselors, Andrea Campbell and Ed Flynn. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you and good afternoon. I also wanted to introduce two other members of our team from the finance office at BPS, our Deputy CFO, Nate Cooter, and our Budget Director, David Bloom. Superintendent Perel hit on a number of the themes that we'd like to talk about today. I'll add a little more color and detail in the slides that we've provided for you. As Superintendent Perel said, the proposed budget includes a $26 million increase for BPS. I will stress once more what Superintendent Perel said because it is so important. There has frankly been some confusion on this point. This does not include an increase in our teacher salaries, as we are still in active negotiations with the BTU. The BTU contract is almost $600 million, so that is a big piece of the puzzle for the BPS financial picture. In addition, the mayor's announced UPK investment of $15 million is on top of the 26 as well. Under the mayor's administration, we have increased per pupil spending in the Boston Public Schools by 25%, from $16,500 to $20,600. It represents a total increase of $200 million for the district overall. As the superintendent stated, this investment comes despite stagnant funding at the state level. Because of the city's commitment to education, despite stagnant state aid, we are able to propose in this budget a number of important investments. Those include $6 million to support equity and stability in our school budgets, as well as a series of targeted high-impact investments that we'll be making on the central budget, which we'll discuss in a moment. This next slide, I'm on page 5, is one that we shared with you last year. And I like to think sometimes it's good to be boring when you're in finance. We have been working for 4 years on long-term financial planning for the Boston Public Schools, and we've made a lot of progress. Certainly, whenever you build a budget, there are hard decisions and trade-offs that are part of making it possible. Is there more we'd like to do? Of course. But when you look at where we are today versus where we are a number of years ago, I hope you would agree that we have injected a lot more stability for our schools and our students in how we fund year over year. This diagram here on slide 5 represents the work of the long-term financial planning team and a framework for investment of where we want to go next. I'll point your attention to these two twin green triangles. We are trying to balance making system-wide investments along with enabling school-led investments. We know there's a balancing act. There are certain things that every school deserves that we fund centrally, But we also know that every school and every community is different, and so we try to ensure that schools have sufficient funds to make investments that they think are right for their students as well. Turning to page 6, this is a detailed view of what's in the FY20 BPS proposed budget. There are 4 categories that we think of our budget in. The first are direct school expenses. Those are dollars you would see, for the most part, sitting right on a school budget. The second category, importantly, are what we call school services budgeted centrally. Those are things you see when you walk through a school. Buses, custodians, some of our special education teachers. They happen to sit on a central line item just because of our legacy financial system, but they are very much paying for direct services to students in schools. As the superintendent stated, those 2 categories together represent 89% of our proposed spending for next year. The third category is central administration. This is an area that represents 5.4% of our total spending, and we've been very proud to keep it flat for the last couple of years. You'll notice a more modest increase, a more significant increase at 3.5% in this year's proposal than in previous years, and that's simply because a number of the investments, which we're very excited to propose, happen to sit in central office. Things like expanding access to exam schools, improving welcome services, and offering support to some of our highest need schools through our network structure. And then our fourth and final category are services for non BPS students. So this could include everything from universal pre-K services for students who are sitting in our community-based partners, as well as out-of-district special education or vocational placements. On slide 7, we share some of the data about recent history of BPS appropriation in the city of Boston. Again, a $200 million increase since FY14. This contrasts starkly with what the state picture looks like. I believe many of you have seen this graph before, but we want to hit it home because it is so important. Chapter 70 education aid has been basically flat for the last decade. And turning to slide 9, if you look 10 years ago at FY10, state funding represented 20% of the spending for BPS. We expect next year for it to be 4%, and importantly, under the proposed Education Promise Act, it would over time grow back to 17%. The superintendent stressed, and I think many of you have been part of these conversations, of what the city is fighting for at the state level for education reform. Turning back to the general fund picture, I'm on slide 11. We mentioned the $200 million increase in the general fund appropriation for BPS since FY14. That's shown on the graph on the left, divided between what sits on a school budget versus what's on everything else, as I described those 3 categories: school services budgeted essentially, central administration, and our non-BPS student services. The portion of our budget that sits on school budgets has actually increased very slightly from 53 to 54%. Over that time period, the combination of significant increases in general fund appropriation with some slight declines in enrollment have led to a very significant 25% increase in per pupil spending. With that additional spending, we have invested in lots of important things for our kids. One of those has been more teaching staff. We've added almost 400 additional teaching staff in the last 6 years, improving our teaching staff ratio by approximately 10%. As the superintendent stated, our FY20 proposed budget has a series of investments which we're excited to share with you today. They're listed on page 13. Because the superintendent talked about them in some detail, I'm going to not go through each line in detail today, but these will be the subject of our conversation with you in the coming weeks. In addition, it is just as important to sustain what we've already invested in. Budgets are not just about investing in what's new. We often laugh that there's very little consensus in academia about what works in education. But I think three of the things that the academics would have as much consensus as possible on that are good for kids are more time learning, early education, and having access to great teachers. The Boston Public Schools has made significant and meaningful reforms in each of these three areas in recent years, and we're proud that the FY20 budget sustains those investments. Before wrapping up, I'll share a touch more detail on some of our investments that we're particularly excited about. As the superintendent mentioned, we have proposed $750,000 to support some of our lower performing schools. These schools will be implementing DESE-required comprehensive improvement plans, and yet the state did not provide additional resources beyond the planning period for the implementation of those plans. We also continue to invest in our high schools with a two-pronged approach, both additional funding that goes to schools, particularly schools that serve students with what we call EWIs, early warning indicators. These are our high schools that are accepting students who have shown that they've had some struggles in middle school. We're also continuing to invest in vocational programs, and we're supplementing that with some central technology and tools to help the work that happens in schools, including something called Naviance, which is a tool that tracks student preparation for college and career, and investment in an early warning system so that teachers and school staff can see the data on kids that need help as early as possible. We're also proposing investment in engagement and welcoming our families, investing to improve proactive communication, information access, and the registration experience for families. In short, we want our welcome centers to be even more welcoming. I'm on page 19 now. I think many of you were in our briefing 2 months ago when we gave you a preview of the FY20 budget, and there was a lot of excitement about reducing barriers to exam schools through access to the ISEE test. As many of you know, the test today is administered at a number of locations on a Saturday morning. Despite efforts to get more and more kids there, we still find that the diversity of our applicant pool isn't what we want, and so the next measure that we'll be trying is for the test to take place in the home school of every student during the school day. We are hopeful that this will continue to support our efforts to improve the diversity of our exam schools. And lastly, the superintendent mentioned it, but I'd like to give one more plug. We are really excited this year to have launched a new website. We hear a lot of comments, as I'm sure you do, from your constituents. Where is the money going in the Boston Public Schools? Well, we took the time to put every single dollar onto a website that we hope is as user-friendly as possible, where you can explore the total spending in the central office and how much is spent on every school. I encourage you and your staff to take a look. Again, it's bostonpublicschools.org/explorebudget. And in addition, we have all of our historic information that we publish every year, which we also think is quite comprehensive on our budget website, bostonpublicschools.org/budget, including WSF by schools, our account and program code budgets, and lots more. So with that, I'll turn it back to the chair for questions.
Thank you, Eleanor. Could you clarify, the 400 teachers have been hired over what period of time?
Since FY14, we have added approximately 388 teaching staff. That's a combination of teachers and paraprofessionals.
Okay. And enrollment has decline, stagnant, up?
Slightly declined, single digits, low single digits.
So are we having better student-teacher ratios? I know we closed a number of schools and merged schools in, 2010. There's 125 buildings now. Back then, there was probably 150 or so. Just curious, growing the teacher staff that much when enrollment is basically flat.
Yes, we have improved student-to-teacher ratios. One of the biggest areas of investment has been in inclusion, rolling out inclusion, so that more of our students who would otherwise be in substantially separate classroom environments can be taught side by side in a inclusive environment, and that is slightly more intensive from a staffing ratio point of view.
And could you explain, was it an 18 class size, and what makes up an inclusion classroom?
Our typical staffing recommendation, and there's variation by school, so a typical inclusive classroom might have 15 students who would otherwise have been in a general ed setting, and 5 students who are designated with special needs. Some of the 15 students could also have IEPs as well.
Right, and so that's up from, was the maximum 18 at one point?
I don't believe so, but again, I want to reiterate that there's variation across schools. We have some schools that choose to have 2 teachers in every classroom as opposed to a teacher and a paraprofessional, and in those they might have slightly more students.
Okay, and then lastly, and I want to hand it over to the ed chair, Sped Pack, you mentioned a lot of the advocates. I'm hoping that, Sped Pack is definitely one of them, very involved in many past years' budgets.
Yes.
Okay.
They're always very involved.
Okay,
and actually very productively so.
Right. I think we made an adjustment just maybe 2 or 3 years ago. We added a student, I'm sorry,
Yep.
a student, right?
Your memory is correct. For the FY17 budget, so 3 years ago, we made adjustments to the staffing guidelines for 2 of our categories of special needs. We stayed below state guidelines and below our collective bargaining.
Right.
And I believe, we've continued to make very significant investments in special education overall, and I believe the transition has been reasonably smooth.
Right, and I think if I remember correctly, again, there was some significant pushback, but
Yes.
Sped Pack stood by that, and would you say that, it's, they're satisfied with the adjustment at this point?
I wouldn't want to venture to speak
Yeah,
on their behalf.
right.
I will say that we've continued to have a very productive partnership with them,
Right.
and I think they are largely in support of the investments we continue to make.
Right. So,
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so when we do have our hearing, which special ed will be part of the discussion, I would ask to invite them in as well, hopefully to provide some testimony.
Yes, and some of you may recall that when we were here for a hearing on special education 3 weeks ago, was it? Actually, Carolyn Kane, the chair of Sped Pack, came and testified as well.
Great.
And was present in part of that hearing. So we can certainly ask her if she's able to join us again.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Councilor Asabi-George.
And before you jump into questions, I just wanted to point out that in addition to the 4 of us here at the table, as needed, we have a number of our senior leaders here. Charles Granson, our Chief Academic Officer, Emily Kozelbosch, in charge of Human Capital, Mary Driscoll, who oversees all of our elementary and middle schools, Monica Roberts, our Chief Engagement Officer, who manages both family and community engagement and welcome centers, and John Hanlon, our Chief of Operations, Rob Consalvo, our Chief of Staff, and Ellen McDonough from our Intergovernmental Relations team. I think we have most of the landscape covered.
Great.
There may be a few questions we're not going to be able to answer, but I'd be surprised, so we will do our best, and we look forward to the ongoing conversation.
Great, thank you. Councilor
Thank you.
Asabi.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for this overview. I know that over the coming weeks, we'll get into some more detail as we cover each of the topics over the next few weeks. Just to follow up with some of Councilor Siomo's questions on the typical inclusion classroom, 15 gen ed students, 5 kids on an IEP, varying degrees of need. What is the typical assortment of teachers and adults in the classroom? Is there a recommended balance of adult versus kid?
In a classroom with that profile, we would typically have a teacher and a paraprofessional.
Is that what's recommended? And I know schools have some autonomy to adjust with that. Is that what's the national standard for inclusion?
I can't speak to the national standard for inclusion. I know that is our recommended staffing internally at BPS.
Right. That is something that is concerning to a number of school communities across our district, that sometimes that proportion isn't appropriate to the needs of the kids in the classroom. But I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that during SPED. On slide 6, we really detail out the different categories of the FY20 proposed budget. You referenced the adopted FY19. It would be interesting to know what the projected finished numbers are for that FY19. As we know, the transportation budget is going to be over about $7 million. So where in these columns are we going to see any sort of significant ups or downs in that budget? Because that $7 million for transportation will need to come from somewhere.
Yep. Every year, as you can imagine, with a $1 billion budget, some things come in a bit higher and some things a bit lower than we expect when we embark on the process. You are correct. We are going high in transportation, and as we'll also talk to you about, we're going high in food services. That has been offset by coming in lower on utilities, snow removal, benefits, and salaries.
Okay. And then with the high in transportation, over the last, this is I think my 4th budget.
Yeah.
Every year we've been over by, I think it was 10 million the first year, 6 or 7. We're projecting 7 this year. Why aren't we just being more accurate with our budgeting projections for the next fiscal year?
Our hope is that the budget we present to you right now is one that we're going to hit. And so we've worked very closely with the transportation team, and they'll be, John Hanlon is with us here today, and we'll be hearing from them directly in the operations one. But you'll notice here a 4.7% increase and a $4 million, that translates to $4 million. There's also additional funding for transportation in the line that's transportation for non BPS student services. We have worked with them to try to develop what we hope is a realistic budget. We continue to have pressures in transportation. We'd like to be saving more money than we are, frankly. We continue to have pressures on wages, on rising number of students who are having door-to-door service, one-to-one monitors, et cetera.
And if I may just add in on that, I just want to draw people back to one of my earlier points that of the BPS transportation budget spent on BPS students, 40% of that is consumed with special education needs. These are required by IEPs, door-to-door, one-to-one bus monitors. And I also want to note that in this same the past 5-year period, the number of students with autism has increased by 100%. That's a doubling in the early grades, and it's increased by 64% across the K-12 spectrum. So I want to make sure that people are keeping in mind the nature of the commitments that we must make to these students, both statutorily and morally, for their safety, security, and transport to school. It's a huge driver of the BPS transportation budget.
Great, thank you. And then related to transportation, it's excellent that all of our kids 7 to 12 will have access to those MBTA passes. I think that's great. Will that include students who currently receive door-to-door transportation? Will they also have a bus pass, MBTA pass, and the M7?
Yes.
That's great, because right now I know many of our special ed students who are receiving travel training. If they don't qualify for an M7 now, teachers and school communities and community partners are coughing up that funding so kids can receive, get bus passes to do that travel training. So I'm excited to hear that, and I know some of our friends in special ed services will be happy to hear that as well. I don't know if you did your time right.
I did.
I tried to. I'll see the rest of my time for next round. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor.
Councilor Flaherty.
Mr. Chairman, good afternoon, Superintendent, Chief, Deputy Chief, and Director. Quick question from your initial presentation. You had indicated that there's 30,000 kids per day get transported. You indicated 21% of them are 21% of that funding is non-BPS. How many actual students? How many actual non-BPS students? And that's a combination of parochial.
Give us just a moment, we'll pull that
Yeah,
up.
we'll pull that up shortly, Counselor.
Very good. Also, with respect to the exam schools, I've heard from a lot of parents, particularly those that have children in parochial schools, and one of the reasons they cited that they're in a parochial school because they didn't get the school of they didn't get their Boston public school of their choice. In worse, prior to your tenure, Superintendent, they were unassigned, and so when you didn't get the school of your choice, or you were left unassigned, you did what you had to do to make sure your child had quality education. Want to make sure that as we're making some changes to the exam schools in terms of where the tests are, what does that mean for those that are in private and parochial schools to be able to continue to compete for the Latin O'Brien and the Latin Academy exam?
There shouldn't be any change for those students and families.
Okay. And then what efforts? I see 364, which is really probably about organizing the test, but kids that are getting C's and D's, they're not going to be able to compete to get into Latin. So wouldn't that be money better be spent in exam school prep, very much like SAT prep to take the
Yes.
SAT? Shouldn't we be focusing on getting these kids up to snuff, not only just in the subject matter, but also in the test-taking skill portion of it? If it's just about 364, just having exams and putting them around the different sites, I don't think that's going to net the result that we want. At least the effort behind it, and I think we really should be focusing on the exam school prep part of that.
Counselor, we agree with you and actually have been doing that for the past 3 years. This is the third year where BPS has been investing in its exam school initiative that provides summer and early fall tutoring to additional students, those who might not be benefiting from that purchased privately by their parents, as you know, so to level the playing field there. We've also been investing in registering them, buses to the test, but it is clear in our data analysis that making the test itself more accessible actually leverages the investments that we have been making, both in the exam school initiative and the tutoring and prep support. I also want to point to the district's, we haven't highlighted, but the district's ongoing and continued investment in Excellence for All, which is expanding opportunity beyond the advanced work classes to more students in the 4th and 5th, and now 6th grade as well. So if you braid those three together, driving more equitable enrichment and academic rigor in 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, a concerted effort through the exam school initiative in tutoring prep support, and accessibility during the school day, which will make this easier for all students and families. We believe those three things together are important steps forward.
And one other small clarification, not all students will take the test. We're still working out the details of how to implement it, but we expect schools to recommend students to participate based on their past academic performance, and we'll be engaging with families on an opt-in process.
Very good. And then with respect to this, that summer sort of Latin school prep thing, may want to consider having one in every neighborhood. Same issues that we saw with kids not getting to the exam school site, and that's maybe they overslept, maybe the mother, father weren't paying attention to the date and didn't get their kid there. I mean, there's a whole myriad of different issues. But with respect to that Latin exam summer program, I think it's held at Latin. We may want to give some thought to maybe sort of
Noted.
expanding the circle on that in the same effort and same vein that you guys are conducting. I said this often, Boston boasts of having the best college and universities in the world, and I think a great measuring stick for our Boston Public Schools is how many of our kids are actually getting into these schools, the schools that call Boston their home. And so I'd like to, and I know that the acceptance letters are out now for next fall, if through the chair, if you could get us a list or at least the number of Boston Public School high school students that have actually been accepted to Boston's colleges and universities. As you know, we've had a very brief discussion. We'll have hearings on a year 13 and an intense college prep opportunity. which moves the question as to, are we doing enough by way of the college prep course load? Are we doing enough by providing AP classes to as many students and in many of the schools as possible? That's how we're going to be able to compete in a global economy when our Boston Public School kids from all of our neighborhoods are able to get into some of the best colleges and universities in the world that are right here in our city. For me, it's not good enough that a kid is just graduating from school and then home by Thanksgiving or home after his or her first year in college. We must do better than that, and I think it starts with our Boston Public Schools and our approach towards college. It shouldn't just be a hugs and high five when a kid comes across the stage with a diploma, and we really kind of don't follow that student. We want that kid to get into a great school, to compete at that school, to get a degree from that school, and then get into the job market here in our city.
Great. Thank you, Counselor. Just a couple of points. One is that we will be happy during the academics hearing, which I believe is next week, to make sure we bring data on the number of students, both in AP courses and also dual enrollment.
Okay.
To your point about higher ed partnerships, that has been growing and expanding, and it is something that we want to continue to do more of. And I also want to note that one of the issues we've tackled through the high school work groups that launched this spring or earlier, might have been winter, are one focused on aligning and strengthening our graduation requirements in keeping with the Mass Corps recommended program of study. All of that, I think, fits right in the direction. And then the last point to your question is that the number of non-BPS students that we are obligated by state law to provide transportation to, they are city residents, students attending the charter and parochial schools, that's roughly 11,000 students.
Gotcha.
That we are transporting, which is why we always want to make sure people understand that the BPS transportation budget is really the city's education transportation budget,
right,
in that it covers students of all school types.
But it's basically a third of the students that we're transporting are non-BPS. So thank you, Superintendent. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilor Garrison.
Good afternoon, Superintendent Pirelli. I only have like one question that maybe you can comment on. I was reading the paper today, and I saw they were closing 2 schools in West Roxbury. Could you comment on that, please?
Yes. So this is an issue that we brought to the fore last fall in early October. As you know, the Build BPS Master and Educational Facilities Plan that we unveiled in October is focused on building buildings, repairing existing buildings, and making investments in long-term maintenance, which had long been deferred in Boston. In several cases, that long-term neglect over many years, absent the kind of investment in Build BPS, that is now allowing us to do things like roofs, boilers, windows on a fairly regular and consistent basis, did leave us with a number of buildings that had deteriorated to a point where they are not salvageable. Unfortunately, that was the case at the West Roxbury Educational Complex. It also happened with such speed that we did not have the sort of planful timeline that we would prefer. I arrived and was appointed on July 2nd. On July 11th, I was informed by Inspectional Services that the building was in such rough shape that it could not open this past September. We made significant investments in emergency repairs to ensure the building was safe so that we could then have this entire year to plan appropriately for meeting the needs of those students who were in 2 schools with long struggling histories and declining enrollment. Because of the tight timeline, both of those schools are closing. The seniors are remaining together at the Irving Middle School in Roslindale so that they can graduate from their same schools. And we are working on both individual transitions and program transitions. The school committee approved this closure recommendation in December, and we have been regularly updating the school committee and the general public on the transition plans. I also want to note that some of you may be aware that recently we proactively identified and called for a full engineering report on a second building of concern but doing it proactively has given us a longer planning timeline to meet the needs of those schools. That's the Jackson Mann facility in Alston-Brighton that currently houses 2 schools and a community center. However, by proactively calling a full engineering report that gave us a roadmap for immediate repairs that we can make to secure that building for at least 2 years in safe operation, means that we have a planned full path forward. And I want to reflect on the fact that that is exactly what we hope to be able to do. Boston still has some troubled buildings. You don't get 20 years of not fully investing in buildings and not reap the challenges that comes from that. So we are on a proactive path to make sure we stay in front of those problems, identify them, and then set up a planful process with the school communities. That's what we're doing with Jackson Mann.
My second question is, could they use some of these schools to put up a charter school for Roxbury Prep?
That is not currently on any sort of discussion timeline. The status of the West Roxbury complex is that it is a complete knockdown and rebuild. It will not be, it is not safe for anyone to be in. We are mothballing the facility this spring and summer. That property remains in BPS hands, and that is part of one of the many ongoing Build BPS conversations about whether we rebuild a high school for BPS students on that property or look at alternative scenarios. But any brand new build takes about 5 to 7 years if we're using state funding through the MSBA. So no, it is not available for any short-term needs of other school communities.
Because in West Roxbury, my constituency is fighting to keep the charter school from being built, and I was thinking maybe they could contribute these two schools that are closing to that Roxbury Prep.
And unfortunately, because the buildings are so deteriorated, they are unsafe and they are not available to be used. They have to be completely knocked down and rebuilt.
Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. I would just add, most buildings built in the 60s and 70s should be knocked down, but Counselor Zachem. Oh, I'm sorry, Counselor Edwards, I'm sorry.
Thank you, just in time. I really appreciate your presentation in general. The 30,000-foot view has been helpful to understand, especially your comments on that 89% of the BPS budget is going into the classroom, and also that 5% of the non-BPS, 5% of the budget is for non-BPS students, but it's state mandated. Correct? No.
Actually, if we go to that chart, there are 2 different lines in there. So there is both, and Eleanor, feel free to jump in. There's both the state mandated transportation for charter, private, parochial, and out-of-district special education students. That is 29 million. And then 31 million are other investments in non-BPS students. This again includes out-of-district placements for vocational and special ed, but also the 4.3 million, if I have it right. 4.8 million that we're investing, what?
Sorry, 3.8.
3.8 that we're investing in universal pre-K. These are existing. We are replacing a federal grant that expired, so 3.8 million to preserve universal pre-K access for 4-year-olds. This is the kind of investment that we make in early education, but they're not yet BPS students.
And so, and I appreciate that breakdown. I do, and I think at some point we discussed when it came to charter schools, especially in East Boston, where they have a mixed population of Boston students and folks from Chelsea and other, because they could recruit from wherever. I recall there being some adjustments being made for that budget to make sure that we weren't paying for transportation or some, I just want to make sure there's no spillage of our budget for our BPS kids or Boston resident children into a school that gets both. And how do we make sure that we're not overpaying or that they're benefiting from our money, our tax dollars?
We can look into that and get
Okay.
back to you.
Yeah.
It's a
All
good
right.
question.
So Could you walk me through the soft landing again? Maybe use East Boston as an example of the high school.
Yep. We have had very clear feedback that we need to give schools more stability year over year. And we have certain neighborhoods, East Boston is actually at the top of the list, that have had more significant enrollment shifts. And so last year, we implemented a policy where the first 1% decline of a school's budget would be absorbed by the district. And this year, we made further investments so that we could absorb the first 2%. In effect, when we know that we have small enrollment changes year over year, and what we're trying to do is protect schools from small enrollment changes. When we see more pronounced major demographic shifts like are happening, unfortunately, for East Boston High as an example, we try to work with the schools to adjust the services that are offered at the school. I'm sure David or Nate could jump in, and I don't have it at my fingertips, as using East Boston High as an example. They're losing a lot of students year over year, and so we're working with them to, for instance, change their master schedule because they do need fewer math courses, English courses, et cetera.
Right, and I think part of that analysis in the weighted student formula, has it ever included looking at displacement? When a community is going through massive amounts of development that we're having, our development isn't bringing in new kids right now, or they're bringing in very young kids, not high school age kids. So what is concerning to me is that we're displacing our population here in Boston. We're in a housing crisis. So as that population's moving out, a lot of those families with those kids who would be going to the high school or were in the high school are now out of the district. And so we displace them, then give the school less funding. It seems like a perpetual spiral down of a school instead of figuring out ways to make sure a school is successful and can maintain itself.
Yeah, and I can speak, I think, for the group here at the table. We all saw the letter that you shared on that topic, and I think you raised lots of great points. And that's why the work of Build BPS is so important, because we're using that as a forum to talk about how we configure our schools, what the grade spans are, and unfortunately, that process just takes time. And so we are engaging in those conversations in neighborhoods like East Boston. Unfortunately, it's not a quick fix that we can change it immediately for September. Did you want to add anything?
What I would add real quick before you go is that while it may not be a quick fix, I do think if displacement's not part of your analysis, you're going to have this in several other communities as well. So I'll wait for the next round.
Yeah, and one thing I will just say on that point is that as part of our Build BPS planning, we work carefully both with PFD, but increasingly with DND and the Boston Planning and Development Agency to actually, we're beginning a process of even taking a case study of particular neighborhoods to figure out where we may find property, what their enrollment projections are, what their demographic forecasts are, and build that into our modeling as well. So thank you for that suggestion.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Councilor Zakem.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Superintendent, and your team. It's a pleasure to see you. I do want to talk a little bit about Build BPS, just very briefly. I think it's an exciting initiative and something that's long overdue, and something that we need to continue doing in a thoughtful manner. And my questions relate to the siting, location, where we are in the planning process as part of Build BPS for schools in our downtown neighborhoods. I know in certainly the areas that I represent, and I believe Councilor Flynn as well, have seen a surge population, certainly of younger people, of families in these communities that very often don't have easy access to K-8 schools. And as we talk about, you mentioned a moment ago, Superintendent, about talking with the BPDA and DND about some of this. You know, there are massive development projects going up throughout our downtown, whether we're talking about in the Fenway, or we're talking about the Government Center Garage over the corner here, what's happening around the TD Garden. I think these are all areas where residents and I believe the developers would be open to physically locating a school, but that's something that BPS has to partner with, has to obviously operate the school, that sort of thing. Where are you both on sort of public-private partnerships like that, particularly in our much more expensive real estate-wise communities, and aside from that, where is Bill BPS on locating a downtown K-8?
Yep. So I'll invite either John Hanlon, Rob, or Nate to join me on any of the answers. But we are definitely, as I mentioned, we've been working with BPDA for over a year around their enrollment and demographic projections. But now we are beginning to work with them around development opportunities, around property opportunities, and around, I always get the term wrong, and Rob can correct me if I'm missing it, housing supported buildings, Rob?
Public assets.
Thank you. Housing with public assets. I knew one of us would get it right. So we're looking at those explorations. We're also open to explorations with developers around swing space. So one of the things we need in order to make these moves, particularly in the case when you have a troubled building, is we need to move students out, or if we're reconfiguring an older middle school into a 7 to 12 or a K to 6, we need a location for those students while we're retrofitting the building. So I think all of those are quite possible. I think in terms of downtown neighborhoods, obviously through Build BPS, one of our major investments has been the expansion of the Elliott K to 8 in multiple buildings. I think the other two neighborhoods that are key to sort of serving the downtown community and are interconnected beyond the North End are both Charlestown and East Boston, that operate in an ecosystem of downtown schools. And so I think looking at those, the Build BPS path forward is working toward a simplified system away from our 20 grade configurations. Boston's not a uniform town. We're not going to get rid of every variation, but to funnel toward a more rational system that is K-6, 7 to 12, and K-8, 9 to 12. Some buildings and some communities work better one way or another, so we are looking at a dual track where families are choosing one or the other, or have the option to switch from one to the other. You could stay in a K to 8 and still get into a 7 to 12 at the 9th grade. So that is our current approach. We have not embarked on, in terms of new school buildings, our demographic analysis currently concentrates the need. One of the key themes is placing new buildings where we have high student need and low historic access. So while there are lots of buildings going up and there are some projections, it's hard to know how many children and families will be in some of those, whereas we have very clear data on the predominant location of the vast majority of our current students, which are Dorchester, Mattapan, Roxbury, and East Boston. So those are the four where most of our new build plans are currently located, but in constant conversation with the demographic and projections, then it may open up opportunities to look at other buildings.
And I think if BPS is willing, you know, long before I was here, or I think any of you, there were efforts by, you know, private residents in the downtown neighborhood to support at least the capital costs of a new school. And I think the prior administration was not interested in engaging in that partnership. And I know capital costs are not the only budgetary issue that's at play there, but there is a real appetite, I think, including from many folks, you know, who do have the resources to go to private schools, to go to parochial schools, but want to participate in BPS. I want to be part of that, and I want to make sure that we're open to that, but also, as Rob was saying, the housing-supported assets.
So the Department of Neighborhood Development has a program called Housing with Public Assets, where they're looking to utilize public parcels for private housing opportunities.
So I think, and I'll stop after this, Mr. Chairman, you know, certainly in our denser neighborhoods where there's not, you know, there's not a lot of city-owned land or state-owned land besides maybe the State House, you know, which is always, you know, something we might
Make
talk
an
about.
interesting school
we might
building
talk
now that
about
you
with
mention it.
With our colleagues up there. But, you know, there is a real appetite I've heard from for-profit and nonprofit developers for these kind of partnerships of putting a BPS facility of some configuration as part of that, whether it's for senior housing, which, you know, can work well that way. So please, I just want to make sure we're open to that. And I think it is one of the only ways we're going to see a new school building in our downtown neighborhoods.
We're definitely interested in public-private partnerships. We are, though, I do want to be clear, we importantly have to make sure that enrollment projections suggest sustainability of a school beyond opening. Sure. So just as you said, it's not just about the capital, it is about making sure that there are enough enrollment projections that you could actually sustain a school over multiple years. I think that's the dance.
Thank you.
And Council, I would just add to the superintendent's point and to your remarks about partnerships. One of the things that we've realized with Bill BPS and that we're doing more now than ever is the need to work in an intergovernmental relations fashion. We are regularly talking with the BPDA, and in fact are meeting with them to discuss our Bill BPS plans and what the long-term projections in the city look like. We're talking with DND around this very similar issue. We know that we have to talk more with inspectional services and public works. The interplay between all of the government agencies is going to be critical in Bill BPS moving forward. So equally important is that intergovernmental relations aspect. Alan McDonough from our team, who's here as director, working on that full-time, as well as all of our team. Those relationships are equally important from the partnership perspective to make sure all of our government agencies inside and outside of city halls are talking to each other, are on the same page, and using and sharing each other's data to help inform decisions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Campbell.
Thank you, Councilor Siomo, and thank you, Superintendent, and your incredible team for your hard work. Not just you guys, obviously, everyone who's here and who's still back at the bowling building. Not an easy process, so looking forward to reviewing the budget over the course of the months ahead. I will sort of jump right in. Just for clarity and purposes, particularly for folks who watch, what is the current number of students in BPS?
Rounded up 55,000, and they can pull up the exact.
Yeah.
And it as you can imagine, it's a different number at different times of the year.
Exactly.
So we could answer as of October 1st. We could, there's a lot of variation in how to measure that.
Because there's different figures floating out, whether it's rounding up to 55,000, sometimes it's under 54,000. So I guess as of today, what's the current number? And we don't have to look for it.
Yeah, I mean, so a couple of things about that. 55,000 is the rounded number in terms of where we are. We are down about 1,200 students this year relative to prior year. We are seeing a slight decline in enrollment. And just, if I could, because this has come up yesterday in the Bill BPS hearing, and from each of you, that the biggest factors affecting our enrollment have to do with larger demographic trends that are affecting the region, state, and really all of New England, and is mitigated somewhat by the amount of development we're seeing in the city. But we have an aging population. Families are having children later in life. They're having less children. Those demographic trends far outpace the development that we're even seeing. And then when we've partnered with the BPDA to help understand how the mayor's housing plan integrates into our enrollment projections, we've learned some basics around what it means for developments, but the size of a development impacts the number of families we anticipate. So the larger a housing unit will be, a building will be, the less families we can anticipate, as well as the number of rooms that are in a particular unit and the cost of those units, right? So as we build expensive housing, you see less students coming from it. These are all factors that, we hear in all of our BPS community meetings. The development down the street from us is going to yield X number of kids. You need to build a new school quickly. And really what we're anticipating is, even in the places where there is family housing going in, it is likely going to just balance the enrollment declines that we would see from demographic trends overall.
Do we track any, so how much of the decline is also either folks leaving our system to choose a different system, whether it's going to private school, parochial school, charter school, or moving somewhere else because of either they're not satisfied with the choice they got, the quality of the school they're currently attending, or they sort of never, I guess, enrolled, or maybe they did for a short period of time but decided to go elsewhere because BPS isn't the best option?
The state collects and reports that information. This year was the biggest single enrollment drop we saw. As Nate mentioned, it was 2% or 1,200 students. And the state has not yet, I don't believe, released the figures for the current school year across those different sectors, but it's available historically.
Thank you.
And we have that if you'd like it.
Yes, thank you. And then just going back to some questions around the student-teacher ratio, Obviously, that's improved. Eleanor, you were speaking to that a little bit. What are the numbers currently for student-teacher ratio, and how do we compare to, say, other national sort of urban school districts?
So one of the ways that we sometimes report it, because it seems more intuitive, is how many teaching staff are there for 100 kids?
How many teaching staff are there?
And those figures are on page 12. In FY14, we had about 10.3 teaching staff for 100 kids, and we expect next year to have about 11.3. So if you picture a couple classrooms with 100 kids, one more adult present now than we had 6 years ago. I can tell you high level that our ratios compare very favorably nationally, but not as well in the state of Massachusetts. Massachusetts is a rich state, and the state spends a lot on education. And so actually, if you look across the state, the number of adults in a classroom tends to be higher on average than we have in Boston, even though we do spend more.
Do you know, numbers-wise, what those ratios are in Massachusetts and nationally?
We can pull them. If you want the
Okay.
student-to-teacher ratios
That'd be great.
in Boston, Massachusetts, and the country, we can get those. Yeah, no, I would, and I was alarmed to see that other districts in Massachusetts have more adults than we do, despite our high levels of spending. And so that's definitely something for us to work on.
Thank you. I can wait till the next round comes.
Thank you. Counselor Flynn.
Thank you, Councilor Siomo, and thank you, Superintendent, for your strong leadership, and to your team as well for the great cooperation they've been providing to us on the City Council. Superintendent, I had a chance to look at the new homepage that you had, and I also noticed it's in languages. It's in English, obviously, but in languages other than English as well. So thank you for your outreach on language access. Can you talk about language access, Superintendent, and what programs are available for families that may, the parents that may not speak English? What type of outreach are you providing right now?
I'm going to ask our Chief of Engagement, Monica Roberts, to come down and join me. This has been a long-standing commitment. But Counselor, if I can just ask you, are you talking about in terms of supporting families in navigating the school system or other ways?
Yeah, families navigating the school system, but also parents that are, working with their teacher and their principal,
Yep.
and they may have challenges themselves with
Great.
with the English language.
And Monica, can you speak to some of our accessibility strategies?
Yeah, so good afternoon. We do a couple of things as it relates to the registration and assignment process. We do have staff who speak the various languages, so we provide interpretation support in our centers. We also enable families to schedule an appointment so we can make sure that we have the support needed. All of our materials are translated into different languages, and we are increasingly using ethnic media, including those in other languages, as a way of outreaching to families and making sure that there's awareness around our assignment processes. As it relates to supporting families and schools, our Office of English Learners actually does a very phenomenal job of working with families in partnership with us. They have the District English Learner Advisory Council, which is an advisory of families, parents whose first language is not English and whose children are being served in English learner programs. They are often able to receive supports around how to support their child at home. We have a lot of workshops, so they meet four times a year. And what we find is that there's a lot of parent-to-parent support in that space. In addition, through our office and our parent university arm, we provide English as a second language courses, as well as referrals and a number of parent-child clubs in the language through partnerships across the city. So sometimes we partner with linguistic-based community programs that can work with us in that regard. And then finally, our schools are increasingly working around that, so they are able to, through our Office of English Learners, get access to interpretation support so that our classroom teachers and our principals are able to work directly with families and be able to communicate in the language that families can receive. We also support them with translation and thinking about how to create a welcoming environment as well as materials that all families can really understand.
Great. Thank you, Monica.
Thank you. And I have other questions, but I can wait, Superintendent. Maybe I'll just ask one final question. At yesterday's hearing, I know in the capital budget, there's some funding for technology for students with disabilities that's being invested. Can you talk, just generally speaking, on what the school department is doing with advanced technology to try to provide the best quality education we can for our special education students?
Charles Granson, our Chief Academic Officer, will come down to respond specifically on assistive technology and technology for students with disabilities. That is one of the capital investments you heard.
Yep.
In addition, the district is on a really orderly schedule of technology refresh for all of our buildings. It's actually the same kind of approach that we want to take to our facilities upgrades and improvements. But for the purposes of assistive technology, Charles, you going to leap the barrier there?
Do the limbo.
Hey, Charles. Thanks. Okay. And so a lot of the work we're doing around assistive technology is ensuring that we have one, the hardware and access to devices in school buildings, oftentimes around laptop carts or devices that are going to be installed in classrooms where there's more intensive supports and needs. The other investments are around making sure that we have the resources to train teachers, provide them with supports that they need. And so oftentimes what you'll see, especially when you look at the investment in our ABA services, autism classrooms, we're expanding the number of staff and supports in those areas. And so there will need to be additional technology in those classrooms as we support and open up different additional ABA classrooms.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just had a question that may require a later answer, and I think it has to do with how many school-age kids are in the city of Boston and what percentage go to BPS versus private parochial. And if I remember again, when I first got elected, and I was kind of blown away by this, that historically speaking, BPS school-age kids amount for 75% and 25% other. Does that sound about right?
I'm going to give you some approximate numbers that I have at hand, and if you want me to get more precise, I'd be happy to follow up later. I believe we have approximately 10,000 in charter schools, approximately just shy of 5,000 in parochial. That's been the sector that's had the most significant decline. Metco and private schools are at about 4,000, and, sorry, Metco is just shy of 4,000 and private is at about 4,000. So that's approximately 12, about 22,000 school-age children in Boston in addition to the approximately 55,000 we have in BPS.
Right.
Those are round numbers.
Right.
And those are from the 17-18 school year.
Right. So I guess it's still historically the same split. I find that fascinating. But Councilor Sabi George.
Thank you. Just to follow up on that or to expand on that, how many of these students, and does it come out of the private number, who are our BPS students or would otherwise be our BPS students, but where, for whatever reason, not educating them in the district, they have a special placement, some sort of out-of-district placement, or is that an additional number?
Those students I'm including in the BPS number.
They're part of the 55,000?
Yes.
So of that 55,000, how many are being placed out of district?
You guys have that at your fingertips? Give us just a moment. Well, you can keep asking us questions while we pull it.
Yeah, that's great. And I was actually very shocked to hear that we're down now legitimately to 55 or so thousand for the student population. On the classroom teacher to student ratio number, of our teaching staff, Is this strictly teachers that are in the classroom? Not people that are teachers but no longer in the classroom for they may be coaching or playing another function in our school buildings?
I will double check on that for you. I believe when we conducted the analysis that we shared on the slide, we pulled all teachers and paraprofessionals in the district.
Okay, so that includes paras
I
as
believe so,
well.
and yes, the slide that I shared with the 10.3 and the 11.3,
Yep.
hopefully it's labeled as teaching staff, and that includes both paraprofessionals and teachers.
And does that also include ABAs or other?
Yes, and in
People
fact,
that-
yes.
okay.
The
So I think what would be interesting, maybe for the human capital hearing, is to understand sort of the true teaching licensed teachers in a traditional classroom setting, in a classroom, and then pull out the number of paras that are supporting any ABA, because an ABA may only be there for a few hours a day, so I don't think it's a proper description of the ratio of teacher to student.
that we'd be happy to bring that data. I believe in this analysis, we used full-time equivalent staff.
Okay.
And Mary had also pointed out to me that as we think about the growth in our teaching staff, per Councilor Siomo's question earlier, the increase in our ABA classrooms has been very significant. Superintendent Perel mentioned the market growth in the number of students with autism who have served in those settings. So the combination of inclusion and ABA classrooms has been a big part of the increase.
I think it's also sort of a little bit of a shocking number to know the increase, the true increase, 100% in students experiencing autism. David, do you have that number? I'm sorry. Out of 55,000, how many are going out of district?
I'm still pulling it up.
Okay.
I have the special ed number, but we will get a more fulsome number for you. So we currently are transporting about 200 students to out-of-district special education sites, but we'd be happy to bring a full range of data on the out-of-district special ed, the cost, the number of students, both transportation and tuition itself. And we can bring that to one of the follow-up hearings, probably the one on academics or school budgets.
Great, that'll be helpful. And I think it's out of district, everything out of district. So students end up out of district for lots of different reasons.
Right.
So curious on that number, because
Right.
it would be good to know what the numerical drain is on the number of students in our schools of that 55,000, but also the cost associated with educating those students outside of our district and why we're educating them outside of our district.
Yep.
I know a small number and a smaller number over the years is vocational ed, but why are they leaving?
We'll be happy to bring that, and we'll also bring an analysis of some of our homeless student transportation, but we currently spend just south of $7 million on transporting our homeless students. Some of that is in the out-of-district non-BPS budget, but about $4.4 million of it is part of the BPS transportation budget. Obviously, that's both a commitment and an expectation, and one that we hold very seriously, but you can understand how some of these costs drive our transportation
Right.
budget in
No,
particular.
absolutely. Thank you for, I appreciate that. Look forward to that information. Last year during our budget season, we spent a lot of time talking about the investments and the changes in using the opportunity index. Can we sort of reflect back on what happened last year and take a little bit of a look at some of the changes that we're going to see this year? Because I know there's been obviously some maintaining of partnerships and spending and a decline in addition.
Yes, we had feedback from this body and from the school committee, community members, that I think I could summarize it as, we like the intention, but we want to get into the details on the Opportunity Index. And so after we had launched it last year, we initiated a series of public conversations and outreach to various partners to get input. And the intention of it was, we got to figure out where the greatest need is in Boston, because just looking at direct certification is overly blunt. We were worried about leaving out undocumented families when we switched from free and reduced price lunch forms to direct certification. So we really rolled up our sleeves, went into it in a lot of detail. We met with the ELL task force, the Opportunity Achievement Gap task force. Dr. Colin Rose led a lot of that engagement conversations. And as a result, we made a number of adjustments to how the formula was treated. A few variables went in, a few went out. We took some variables and made them continuous, and presented that to the school committee this fall. We had very positive reception, and so we're now using it in FY20, so the second budget in which it will be used. It is largely the same, the application. We went from allocating $9 million according to the Opportunity Index to allocating 11. So we made a slight increase to the amount of funds distributed through that mechanism. In regards to the question you asked at the end about partnerships, we haven't made any further changes since last year's proposal on how we fund partners.
But we've changed some of our partners.
The big shift that we made last year is we took a pot of money that used to be allocated by central administrators. We put it in the hands of school leaders to make the decisions, and we allocated the funds based on the Opportunity Index. So there were shifts in partners because we changed who the decision maker was, something that I thought was a great change. It was the folks who were closest to the kids and closest to the delivery of the services that partners were providing. So we did see some shifts in which partners were elected when we shifted the decision makers.
All right, we can talk about, we have a future hearing that we can talk more.
Sure. Councilor Edwards.
Thank you. Just to follow up on, since we're talking about the Opportunity Index, and I do know that some of my schools, for example, are doing exceptionally well in being able to raise the money. I think Elliot's been wonderful at being able to raise a lot of money. You know, I think I heard as high as $600,000, being able to raise that outside of schools just with the friends of and with some of the family and the resources. So, and I recall last year you testified how, or not you, but BPS testified how that has taken into account the friends of whatever school being able to raise money versus another school that can't. And I'm bringing this up because I'm curious about, and I don't know if there seemed to be not a clear answer, if there's been any more movement in working with developers, again, about raising money, about getting resources, whether it's capital investments for schools, whether it's, I know you guys went ahead and put the modular classroom in on your own budget in Charlestown, but that kind of partnership I still think is worth looking at and expanding upon and making sure we get them at the table. But I do think it's great that you have the Opportunity Index analysis to make sure that, let's say, a community that's experienced a lot of development doesn't end up with a bunch of development dollars and then further exacerbates inequality. So I guess it's a two-part question. One is, are you working with and have you been increasing your relationship with developers to help provide for additional funds for schools? And then two, when you do, and I hope it's a when, not if, I assume you'll be applying the Opportunity Index lens to that as well.
I'm going to take the last part of the question first, which is that we actually apply the Opportunity Index to all kinds of decision-making and analysis. So one really great example that is a public-private partnership, in this case a foundation, as well as City of Boston capital funds, is the progressive rollout of My Way cafes across the city. And so that is funded both by City of Boston capital dollars and investments by the Shaw Foundation. The best way to roll that out is by neighborhood because of the delivery and transportation. So BPS set its schedule using the Opportunity Index, as well as other measures of neighborhood need, and then very equitably organize those neighborhoods. So it started in started in East Boston, Roxbury and Mattapan, Dorchester and South Boston are next, and then the remaining neighborhoods progressively. So that's how we can use the Opportunity Index in any question where we're analyzing or making decisions based on school need. On the developer question, I don't know if you were in or out a little bit earlier when we were talking about our increased work with the Boston Planning and Development Agency. So that's both about enrollment and data projections, but increasingly about available space, developer partnerships that would be both potentially with DND through their Housing with Public Assets initiative, And then we are currently working with BPDA to make sure they know which neighborhoods we're looking for space in, that they know where we might need swing space. And so we're hoping that some of those matchmaking with potential developments can happen in future. We're actively working with the BPDA on that right now. We do not have any current development partnerships.
Okay, and then, because what I can see is that there's some, for example, some corporations that just adopt a local school or something like that. That's not formally through BPS, that's just them donating directly to the school?
Yeah, there's a long history of
Yeah.
philanthropy
That's fine.
in Boston Public Schools, and definitely the Elliott is not alone in that.
No, I'm
Yeah.
not even talking about the Elliott with that, and you still go through then the opportunity index analysis, noting those donations that came in, and being able to, when you're allocating funds to or no?
No, there isn't any that we currently, it's an interesting question you may be pointing to. BPS does not currently manage around private philanthropy that schools may be soliciting separately. And we do not have a mechanism, because those funds don't flow through us, we don't currently have a mechanism. Some of them go into fiscal sponsors or third-party nonprofits. Some of them go into the Boston Educational Development Fund. But they do not come into BPS proper.
So my question, I guess, to follow up with that is, if a school can then raise $1 million on its own through the community, one, do you find out about it? Do you ever know? Do they have to report it to you? And two, when you're talking about equity and those resources, then how do you really know your opportunity index isn't just missing a lot? I mean, missing the fact that the school can raise for gaps. For example, if East Boston could raise a $2.6 million or $1.2 million on its own, right, then it wouldn't feel the pain that I think it's going to feel with the loss in that funding right now. I guess, yeah, talk to me how you don't, how...
We put in place this time for the first year, at the end of this school year, a reporting requirement for our school leaders to report dollars that were raised through the kind of third-party vehicles that the superintendent was just talking about. So I'm hopeful that we will have good compliance with that new requirement, and that process will yield data we haven't had in the past. You're raising a great question, to which I'm afraid we don't have simple answers. I believe the Friends of the Elliott also make a donation from their fundraising to BPS overall.
We don't have to just talk about the Elliott. There's a lot of schools that can also raise money for themselves.
But it's a challenging situation, because we also don't want to create disincentives for our schools to raise money, that if they raise money, we cut their budgets. It's a serious equity challenge, to which I don't think we have any simple ideas or solutions.
I think the one thing I would say, though, and this is someone who both observed this happening, has experience in education philanthropy, and watched the launch of the Opportunity Index, I actually view the Opportunity Index as a leveler of some of the funds available to schools. Yes, there are schools that recruit and raise money on their own. The Opportunity Index focuses on the needs base of students for the allocation of district dollars. So the schools that are benefiting from the Opportunity Index, there may be places where there's overlap between high-need schools and high fundraising schools, but in general, we don't always see that overlap. So the Opportunity Index is bringing resources into schools that don't always have that kind of access to private fundraising that you're pointing to.
But just to clarify, you're just now getting the reporting from those schools to even know how much they're raising.
In a systematic way, yes.
So you're just now, I mean, if you're going to use, and I think you should use the Opportunity Index.
Right.
But you're just now getting the data to even know what the index should be accounting for.
It's a new requirement that was put in this year.
Can I think...
That's all, I'm just going to be clear.
Can I offer a clarification?
Yeah.
The Opportunity Index, we think, is correlated with the school's ability to raise funds, but it does
That's
not...
what I thought you said last year.
It does not directly account for fundraising that a school does. So a school that, like the Elliott or Boston Latin or even the BTU school in JP, as they raise money, that has no direct impact on their Opportunity Index score. But we actually think, as the alternative measure around need was the direct certification that we use for poverty that's part of our Title I allocation, is also part of our weighted student funding. That is a simplified measure. We are taking into account more community measures, more individual measures to identify need that we think make populations or concentrations of student need at an individual school more difficult to serve. But it is not, the data is not included, the financial fundraising is not
That's
included.
helpful, Nate. And I think our hope is that the investments we're making in the Opportunity Index are counteracting the inequity we see that some schools are able to fundraise. So
Sorry, that's what I was trying to say.
we're trying to say.
No,
is
no,
that we agree.
I agree
it's
with
a problem.
that. I want you to hear, I agree
Good,
with
okay.
that. I just think that without the data, you're not, you're kind of missing
Yeah,
right
fair.
now.
Yep. Yeah, very
Okay.
fair.
And one of the reasons we put that requirement in this year, so hopefully
And
we'll have that.
That's good.
I know Counselor,
know.
just to answer your previous question, the transportation team, thank you, already got back to me. We do not provide T-passes or yellow buses for students who live outside of Boston attending a charter school in Boston. So
That's not, we can do the next round. I'll clarify that question.
great. And
Okay.
we've got members of the transportation team here, but they think we don't send buses to Chelsea
Nope,
to
I
take the
know.
kids to Boston schools, as far as we're aware.
Unless they're homeless.
Great.
Right.
Yeah, unless they're homeless, in which case we do.
Right. McKinney-Vento. Counselor Campbell.
No, thank you. Just quickly following up on the point that Councilor Edwards was making and that you guys agree with, this ability for some schools in the district to be able to exercise their human capital supports by their parents or other experts in their community to raise these large pots of money for their schools. Are the schools responding to the district's request to let the district know what those numbers are, that they are fundraising? Like, is that data coming in? Are people responding to it? Are they I'm just curious what the response has been from those schools.
We asked for it at the end of the school year, so we haven't yet had an end of school year since the requirement was put
Okay.
into place, so I should know more this summer.
Okay, because that would be interesting to absolutely know. I mean, and I get, you guys see it all the time. And then that gets to my bigger question of what's the district's working definition, or what is the district's definition of equity? Right, we use that word quite a bit, whether it's here in every department. I think every department may have a different definition of it or none at all. I'm curious what our definition BPS is of equity.
Great question.
What I wish was that I had the graphic that is often used of the three kids standing, looking over a fence, and their chins are at the same level of the fence, but they're each standing on different height boxes because they are different heights. And so I didn't do justice to the imagery, but I think BPS takes very seriously its two things. One is its commitment to leveling the playing field for all of its students, and the second is recognizing that the district itself, as an educational institution, as is true for many systems of government and public service, is embedded with and intertwined with a history of institutional racism, such that our own problem of practice, thank you. I can't pop it up. Somebody else perhaps could. Somebody found me the graphic. In any case.
I know what
that,
you're
yeah, you know the one I mean.
Yeah.
That we have a history of not reaching our most marginalized populations,
Yeah.
that it is our specific responsibility in operations, in academics, in social emotional learning, and in student support to push ourselves and our adults. It's one of the reasons that the focus on culturally and linguistically sustaining practices, I think, is incredibly important. It is embedded in our vision for instructional equity, and the kinds of moves that you're seeing, weighted student funding, opportunity index, those equity-based budget allocation tools, our investments in exam school access are again getting at the notion that for students from historically marginalized populations, we have to push ourselves harder, make deliberate investments, and structure our programming and services to be more responsive to their needs, to bring them so that their chin is resting on the same level of that fence.
I only ask because it's whether it's school visits or other education conversations, people have various definitions, but when we define it, it obviously can drastically change how we view this budget, how we view policy changes. It may frankly make some people upset, but it's like, we hear you, but this is the lens, and this is our definition, and this is why we're doing this, because we want to address these inequities that we continue to see, and address them for those communities that have historically, like you said, been susceptible to them.
Yeah, and thank you for asking the question, because I'm not sure that everyone has a full sense of just how deliberate BPS has been to push itself through use of specific tools. I've mentioned several of them, but one I also want to highlight, and by the way, this work is the work of the district. We have important engines of expertise in both our Office of Equity and our Opportunity Gaps Office, but this is not the work of any individual office. It is the collective work of the district. And one of the tools that we use to embed equity as a lens in all of our decision making is that we actually have a racial equity analysis tool that all of our staff are trained on, that is used in actual meetings. All of the difficult decisions we make, I use the example of the Opportunity Index when we were sequencing neighborhoods to get the My Way Cafe rollout. In the past, we might have done it by convenience or geography. This is actually weighted by student need. That same racial equity analysis tool is used in decisions around Build BPS. It's used in how we structure academic networks. And so it really is embedded in the way we work. We know we have more work to do, but I think it's important that BPS has embedded tools that push that work on a daily basis.
So I'll ask a couple more questions before I lose this round. Just quickly, on the contract, which is, $600 million, this is for 3 years? Or can you pull this apart a little bit?
Yep, the teacher's last contract expired at the start of this school year, and we're in active negotiation, and the length of the next contract hasn't yet been decided.
So the $600 million that you said earlier, Eleanor.
We currently spend $591 million, I think is the number, on all of the costs associated with our BTU contract. So that's every BTU member's salary.
So that's an estimate that we have to be mindful of.
Yeah.
Okay. And then my last question, for I'm sure the buzz is going to go off, is specifically on slide number 6. We often talk about, central office only being 5.4% of the overall budget, and so have some perspective there, particularly as I'm like, downsize, central office, love you all, but, just, thinking about efficiencies. But the school services that are budgeted centrally versus the direct school expenses, so, 89, it says 89% are in BPS schools, and this is just a question of clarification and understanding. The direct school expenses are resources. What's the difference between these two?
Yep. We have a financial system that we share with the City of Boston, and we have what we call responsibility centers. And a school can be a responsibility center, it's like a department ID, or a central office can be. And some of the stuff you see in schools just happens to sit on a central RC, a central department ID. And so what we're trying to delineate here is to not get trapped in the legacy financial system, which is it's harder to piece apart, and to do something here that sheds a little more light on really where the money's going. So, just take the biggest one on here, $96 million on transportation. I wouldn't call that a central administration expense. You're seeing yellow buses come in and out of schoolyards every day. We've got T-passes in the hands of our kids. That's really a direct service to kids. It happens to sit on what we call a central department ID. And so we're just trying to, in this lens, offer a little more clarity. Did that help?
Right.
But are these resources controlled by someone who sits centrally?
Yes.
It's not at a school where I can sort of pull push and pull on these pieces
That is
here.
exactly correct. And that's an important distinction as we think about decision-making in our system. All of the items in that second category are controlled centrally. And so the schools receive services, not dollars. This year, in order to create the data that was on that new website, we keep pitching the Explore Budget website. We actually linked every dollar of school services budgeted centrally to an individual school, and we shared it with principals. Our hope is that that gives them insight to what we're spending on their behalf, and if they think it's not a good use of money, we're inviting them to tell us that.
Right. And if I can just add two other important points, a couple of other examples of things that of a legacy nature are budgeted centrally. All of our school psychologists are budgeted centrally, but yet allocated out to schools and students. The same is true for many of the related services through special education, so occupational therapists, speech pathologists, some of those required services. And the other way of looking at these two differences, the direct school expenses and the school services budgeted centrally, the direct school expenses are both obviously the teaching staff, but that is where the flexible budget decisions are available to schools based on their school size and enrollment. Whereas the school services budgeted centrally, those are allocated based on student enrollment and student need.
Okay. Councilor Flynn.
Thank you, Council CMO, and thank you, Superintendent. Superintendent, I had the opportunity to attend a Asian healthcare symposium this morning, talking about public health issues. Can you talk about, generally speaking, talk about public health and education, and what relationships you have with our hospitals? At the Tufts Medical Center, the dental program, they were talking about the dental program doing some work at Josiah Quincy, helping our students with dental exams. But what else are we doing on public health, nutrition, interacting with our hospitals, making sure that our students have access to quality public health services, not just during the school year, but 12 months a year?
Thank you, Councilor, for that question. We will, and what we might do is touch lightly on it today and then bring any fuller answers to the hearing on the April 29th, which is focused on student support services.
Okay.
And that will actually have representatives from all of the departments that touch directly on some of these. But I can say at the highest level, nutrition, we just mentioned our substantial partnership with the City of Boston and the Shaw Foundation around the My Way Cafes, which is really revolutionizing both local food and healthy food choices in schools. But both through central office and through our individual schools, we have multiple partnerships with community-based health centers, with schools of nursing, with our major hospitals. Children's Hospital is a major collaborator on multiple topics, but I will point to the Comprehensive Behavioral Health Management Model, the CBHM, and Boston Medical Center is another very active partner. So we'd be happy to bring those together in a compendium and talk about that. But I think it's important to note that we do view and our schools are expected in terms of responding to the needs of students and families, that we do take a whole child, whole family view on how we respond to meet the needs of all of our students. And in many cases, it is required in order to lower what we would refer to as non-academic barriers to learning. So, does a kid eat 3 meals a day? Are they in stable housing? Do they have a coat while they were walking to school? What are the sort of, do they have a parent in prison? What is the trauma that they may be addressing? All of those are things that, whether they are considered the job of a school or not, they are important priorities and challenges that schools today must grapple with, and the district recognizes its role in this. And that includes, the fact that we have additional weights for homeless students in our weighted student funding now is a recognition of some of those kinds of needs. So we'd be happy to delineate that in greater specificity in the student support services hearing, if that makes sense to you.
Yes, it does. Thank you, Superintendent. And just a final comment. In my district, many of my schools are located in and around public housing developments, including the Condon, the Perkins.
Yep.
The Blackstone is halfway between Villa Victoria and in Cathedral as well. What type of outreach can we do to help our students that are in public housing? Maybe some on these issues as well, but is there any extra maybe consideration we also can give students in public housing as it relates to more services for them, since they're already living in maybe in a challenging environment to begin with?
Thank you for raising that. We looked at that directly when we were doing the Opportunity Index work, and I'm pausing because I'm trying to remember the data availability on that one. But we actively looked at it. The goal of the Opportunity Index was to say, what's all the data we could collect about our kids that helps us know where the need is? And I think we weren't able to get the match on, did we get the public housing data? Feel free to, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think
Anything more you'd like to say about that, Dave?
No, so we
And
were
a few
able,
words.
we were able to, so I know one of the pieces of feedback we got from school leaders at the Condon, the Blackstone, also the Harvard Kent and other schools not in your district were, when we initially rolled out the Opportunity Index, did not include measures of public housing, and they said, well, this is something that, our school may be in a neighborhood that has a lot of other factors, but public housing and a lot of our kids coming from public housing can impact what the opportunities that our kids have when they're in school. And so that is something that we looked at and we included in our analysis for the Opportunity Index this year. So it has definitely been a part of the work that we've done.
So what that means is that a school that has a high concentration of students from public housing would then be higher on the Opportunity Index and then have access to some of those additional dollars. Okay. And that is really, if we weren't clear, that is really the function of the Opportunity Index. Weighted student funding, by and large, focuses primarily on educational needs of students. So are they students with disabilities? Are they English learners? There's other modifications. There's poverty concentration. The Opportunity Index brings in an additional range of data that is really about the neighborhoods where students live and what they bring into a school. And so if a lot of them are coming from a public housing development, if many of them are coming with academic challenges of their own before they arrive in the school building, that is factored into the Opportunity Index. So together, weighted student funding and the Opportunity Index are giving are two very important tools for making sure that our budget allocations are based on student need and a fulsome definition of student need.
Okay, do I have time for one more question?
I need to go to...
That's fine. That's
Okay,
fine.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
Counselor Edwards.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate you staying so long here. I have a question about charter school funding, and which maybe will clarify my previous question. A question about transportation equity, and then a final just a quick comment. The comment is with regards to the image that you had alluded to, where the three individuals are standing behind a fence. One's really tall, one's medium, and the other one's short. And so equity is, in response to that image, is putting, step-ups to make sure that they're all equal height. And so I think that that's an important, it is a great way of seeing equity, but I think it's incomplete. And so, and I hope, and I'm sure you already have a more complete vision than that image. At a recent civil rights conference, they criticized the image by saying it centers the person who's shortest as having a problem to be compensated for. Mm-hmm. The real or more comprehensive equity analysis would be questioning why the hell the fence is there to begin with. So, and that's really questioning the systemic barriers that people have. Now, some you can deal with, some you cannot. a BPS. Some you inherited, some you did not. But I think a true complete equity analysis isn't just what's wrong with the small one to compensate with dollars or services, but really saying the fence shouldn't be there at all, whatever that fence may be. So, and I don't doubt that you have that systemic analysis, but if you use that as your point of equity to define how you define equity, I think it left me wondering, well, what about the fence? So that's my only comment. With regards to funding for charter schools, and this might help my understanding, when you have the mixture of Boston, Chelsea, Revere, whatever, whoever's going to a particular school, right, at a charter school, how did the money follows those students, am I correct? Into those schools?
Yes.
Okay. And so if the money's following BPS students into the school, that money then is used to pay for all sorts of things in the school. Salaries, gym, whatever, books, whatever it is. And so I guess as we're paying per pupil, if we're paying more per pupil than say Chelsea is or Revere, then I don't know.
I'm listening.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's say we pay $10,000 per, I know it's more than that, per student, and Chelsea. Huh?
So it's about 18.
It's about 18 or so. Let's say Chelsea pays 10, right? I can't help but think then, because we have Boston students there, we're paying more per student than the other cities are, that then our city dollars are compensating or are helping to fund education of other kids. Am I correct?
I believe so, based on my understanding of the state funding law, yes.
Okay. There may not be anything we can do about that, but it is my concern then that we are paying then to pay and educate kids who are not in BPS and whose tax dollars are not.
Actually, we would love to have you continue to raise that issue where that conversation
Happy
needs to
to.
have, which is at the State House and the legislature.
Happy to, but I
and
needed
it
to
is
make
part
right.
of the it is part of the challenge of
Absolutely, and it was also my challenge in understanding the funding mechanism. So I just wanted to make sure I was clear on that. Not so much that the transportation was. And I think in the transportation hearing, they made sure that if there was ever a mistake, they did an analysis or audit to make sure that didn't happen. So where we could control, we did. And so where we can't, we'll have to go to the State House. And then my final question was with regard to at the transportation hearing. You're not Counselor Garrison, I'm sorry. It was confusing too. In that hearing, we discussed equity and transportation, which was one of the biggest issues when it came to school busing, and talking about how some of the students from Charlestown wanted a particular bus to get them to BLA, how folks in the BLA area, Dorchester, Roxbury, did not have a bus going into Charlestown. And so then I said, well, what if we raise the money then for a bus from Charlestown to go to BLA? And I think it was, I don't mess up her title, Becky Schuster, I don't remember her title though.
our chief equity officer.
Chief equity officer said no, that we would not be able to then raise the money for a bus for those kids to go to BLA. If we were to have that, it would not be equitable, or we wouldn't be allowed to have that bus. And so I guess I'm trying to rectify that with what we just heard about the opportunity index and schools being able to raise hundreds of thousands of dollars and being able to use that private money for themselves. If they couldn't raise this money themselves or get a developer to pay for it, why? Help me understand.
Is the question, why aren't we providing it, or why?
No, the question is if they could provide it themselves and raise it, which I raised this question in the previous hearing, and we were told that would not be equitable and it would not be allowed. So I'm trying to figure out, help me out with this equity analysis if.
So I believe at issue in the transportation equity hearing that we attended last month is the concern that you're raising about some students who, primarily these concerns are coming from the neighborhoods of Charlestown, East Boston, and the North End, specifically for students attending Boston Latin Academy. At that hearing, we presented data that shows that I believe more than twice as many students are coming from the neighborhoods of Dorchester, Roxbury, and Mattapan, and attending Charlestown High School. And they are not getting a yellow school bus from their
Exactly.
neighborhoods directly to their high school.
Right.
Similarly, we have large number of students, larger in fact than the ones coming to Latin Academy, who are attending other BPS schools from neighborhoods all across the city. We do not provide the yellow buses for them. The reason why this is an equity issue that we do have to take very seriously is, and it speaks to some of the concerns that were raised earlier about some schools have the ability to raise money and some don't. Because some students might have the ability to raise money, does that mean that we should provide them a service that other students do not have the ability to do on their own? And we don't believe that we should move in that direction. If the students coming from, say, Dorchester, Roxbury, Mattapan, I can't be so bold as to speak for all of those students
Right.
and their families, but if they cannot raise the funds and have not approached us for that level of service, then we should not allow other students and their families to receive that service, whether they raise the funds for themselves or not. I think the other concern that was raised during that hearing is if the funds for this service were arrived at through community benefit mitigation from development, that's typically a one-time boon of cash that's coming in through community benefit and not something that would be sustainable over time. Again, this is a very, very secondary factor for us and not
Right.
nearly as important as
Right.
the equity factor,
Right.
but also worth consideration.
So just to follow up on a couple points, I think the hearing was incredibly informative about the equity issues as to why BPS directly cannot or will not provide a bus. You were very informative about that. I think just picking up on the mitigation component, it was the point of mitigation is also that it is temporary because the pain or the burden on a community is also temporary. So that's why we thought when it came to the North Washington Bridge, when it came to Sullivan Square, when it came to a lot of things that are being worked on right now, if there's a temporary burden being placed on a particular community, why not leverage that mitigation money to get them a temporary benefit? And being honest about it being temporary, because those developments are causing those delays or causing those headaches. So I think that I guess I would push back and say the assumption is it would be temporary. That's why we would call it mitigation for those times of construction going on. So if I can maybe follow up a little bit more as to why we wouldn't leverage that and get some resource. And then two, and again, it could still come down to your equity analysis saying if we can get that resource, we'll still direct it toward another community that needs that bus maybe more than yours, Counselor. That might be your response. But still, I'd like to know why we don't leverage that. And then when it comes to the, I guess I want to make sure I'm clear again about how the money is raised and then given or not given to BPS. And if people raise money separately from BPS and they spend it directly in the school for school services, but it doesn't go through you, you can't control that, right? Let me just do the two-part analysis so you can see where my head's going. You can't control that. So if I want to raise extra money for Latin or robotics or whatever the program is, the school services, right? These are still educational services. But if I raise that money for a bus, that's a service that I couldn't have. You said it would be something that would go through you. I mean, what if if it just didn't go through you? I guess I really need to know the different. I'm not disagreeing with your analysis or saying I don't see where you're coming from or why it's so incredibly important. I'm just not seeing the consistency between being able to raise money for a robotics, Latin, Italian class, and then you having no control over those services being done there, and a community being able to raise money for a bus and that be another service, but that you would deny that community. I'm not seeing the consistency.
I can't speak for what you're speaking of regarding a robotics program or other services like that. If a number of families in, say, Charlestown wanted to pool funds together and have a an Uber take their kids to and from school every day. That's on those families, and that's a decision that they're making, and that's something that they're doing with their own resources. That's not something that we're providing nor controlling, because we're governed by strict regulations regarding pupil transportation. Anything that we're controlling in terms of transportation needs to, in terms of yellow bus, come in the form of the same yellow buses that we all see throughout the streets every day. If, again, neighborhoods were looking to provide funding for services like that, then, again, we would have to look at the equity of the situation, and in this case, rule against doing that if we feel like it would only be exacerbating an inequity at stake, not an equitable situation, if that makes sense.
Okay, so I think I can wait till the next round. I'm still not clear.
Councilor Flynn. And
Council Sioma, I think I'm all set, Council Sioma. I'm fine, yeah.
Okay, Councilor Campbell.
Thank you, Councilor Sioma. So just going back to, so one of the things that keeps coming up, I mean, I think it comes up in the context of Build BPS, and then recently one of the superintendent candidates talked about this idea of what does it mean to right-size the district, given either declining populations, demographic changes in different areas. I'd be curious from where you sit, Superintendent, as well as your team, what does it mean to right-size this district if we have buildings that have more seats than students? What would that plan look like? How does Build BPS speak to that? What else might we be doing to right-size? Because that's a question that's been coming up quite a bit.
Yeah. I will say that's not a word that we are using.
Okay.
But I do think we are looking carefully at sustainable school models and sustainable school budgets at facilities that meet our student needs, which means phasing out some of the older ones and replacing them with newer ones, or rehabbing and retrofitting some of those buildings. And then using data around enrollment and feeder patterns and family choice to inform the structure of the Build BPS plan, but also as we roll out over 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, continuing that analysis, because as we begin to make shifts, other shifts will happen, both unintended consequences or the choices, in some cases quite positive, the choices that families make, and then other shifts in demographics and enrollment that we can't yet predict. I'm going to leave that statement there for a moment and then say there's another important point around the data that we're using to analyze for Build BPS, and that is that there's a lot of older reports and discussion out there about we've got, space for 90,000 kids, but we only have, 65,000. Now we only have 55,000. Some of those earlier analyses were not educational analyses. They were strict sort of square footage division by number of kids. And one of the things that I think we've fully, I hope we are increasingly informing both you and the general public is the complex needs of Boston Public School students, particularly our students with disabilities, and among them our students in specialized strands. We talked about the growth in autism. We have other significant needs among our students, from emotional impairment to mild and moderate disabilities and multi-physical handicap. Serving these student populations generally requires 3 times the number of classrooms for the same number of general education students. And so what we find is that we don't have the right space at the right grade levels in every neighborhood. And so a lot of the shifts we're trying to make with Build BPS is to make sure that what used to be an afterthought in district placement, where we put the English learners, where we put our specialized strand, is at the forefront. And so we do anticipate that we have clearly said that we are looking to convert and transition our few remaining standalone middle schools. That is an explicit public part of the Build BPS conversation with lots of lead time, beginning with the McCormick, which is transitioning, and then all the subsequent middle schools. As those shifts start to take place, as an example, we will soon, later this spring, announce the high school planning partner to the McCormick teachers for the rebuilt 7 to 12 at Columbia Point. We will also further announce the number of K to 5 elementaries that are going to be able to go K to 6 in order to handle that transition. We have also opened up opportunities for other schools that are not associated with middle school conversions.
So I guess just for time's sake.
Yeah.
So there's still clearly, I mean, even if there's some reports, and we've talked about this too, that don't take in consideration sort of the academic components that you're talking about, that you may need 3 classrooms to serve a certain population of students, you might need a different type of space. There still seems to be still this sort of excess capacities in the system, given either decline in students that don't attend BPS anymore. And then we have this transition coming where we're going to be going to a K through 6, 7, 12 system, or K through 8, 9, 12 system, where we're going to have to make some changes, shift, and possibly close some standalone middle schools, or at least shape them differently. And so the question is, I guess I have 2 questions. One is, how does this, is the system still paying for that excess as we figure this out, that excess capacity? Like, where does that drain on resources show up as we need time to transition? And then the second question, I guess, that's connected to this for me is, at what point do we begin to let community and public know that we're doing this K through 6 or K through 8, this change in order to allow for less transitions for families, which is, I think, a good strategy. But that then means that if you have a standalone middle school, and I went to the Timothy, for example, well, something's going to have to happen with your school. Sorry, but that's, given this is the goal, something's going to have to happen. At what point do we pull them in, even if it's a 2-year, 3-year, 4-year plan? Because you say that goal, which I think is important, and I think I get why you're doing it, why BPS is taking this stance of less transitions and going this way in terms of modeling our schools. But then that means, as you're showing up to a standalone middle school, something's going to be happening in this space. Right. So at what point do we engage public and community and parents and families around what that looks like, even if we don't have all the answers?
Yeah, I'll answer that, and then Eleanor may amplify on your question around budget costs. So on the middle school conversions, we are stating it publicly and consistently and regular in every single community meeting and in every neighborhood. However, that's very different from saying yours is next and here's the date. And so you may notice that one of the realities of Build BPS is that we need to start with moves to open up new opportunities that then can facilitate and give us greater specificity as to which middle school conversion can go next. By the way, one of the reasons the middle schools were prioritized for the most likely place to convert to schools and configurations that better meet student need is exactly to your point. Those are the schools that have lost the most significant enrollment. They've lost 1,800 students. The 6 remaining middle schools have lost 1,800 students in the last 6 years alone, just in the middle schools. It doesn't mean they're not elsewhere in the system, but they're not in middle schools, which means those are our most under-enrolled, least utilized buildings. The McCormick is a good example, is built for, I think, $650. There's about $350 in there currently. So we are resolving those.
Are you okay over there? Okay.
We are resolving some of those major changes by pursuing this middle school strategy.
We have water. They give us that on the council side.
Yeah. Thanks for that heads up. Yeah. And it would be unfortunate for us to lose David at this part in the procedure, so thank you for paying attention to that, Council. I appreciate it.
Providing water.
So we are actually, the middle school plan is in direct response to the question of how do we best utilize buildings and make them meet the needs of students citywide and recognize when enrollment declines have made schools unsustainable. So I want to point that out. That is a one-to-one correlation to what you asked and what Build BPS is actually doing. And as those moves begin, so for example, when the high school partner is announced for the McCormick Middle School, that's a process we're undergoing collaboratively with central office and the McCormick teachers. That will open up 2 years from now a school building as that school then moves into the newly merged campus. That will then accelerate our timeline. So for the other middle schools, the Build BPS team is working really hard right now on the set of if-then scenarios, so we can turn around and say to the Irvings, the Timiltys, the Edwards, your school is likely to transition in 2023. Your school would be likely to transition in 2025. Our goal in general is to have, in an ideal world, at least 2 years of a runway on planning. There may be cases where it's 18 months, but that's why we're talking to all the school communities now, so that they already know it's happening, but yet those schools will still be functioning until it is closer to their conversion time. So we are working really hard to do the sequencing so we can give people a sense of when it's going to come to Roslindale, when it's going to happen in other neighborhoods.
I'll share a few thoughts on the budget impact. Nate, David, please feel free to join in. There are two factors primarily that put a lot of pressure on school budgets with the system we've designed. One is being a small school, and the other is being a school whose classrooms aren't full. So you could be a small school and have your classrooms full, but you just have a scale problem. It's really hard to have art, music, foreign language, all the specials you want, because those teachers just don't have full caseloads. The other challenge is being in a school with classrooms that aren't full. That's a different kind of challenge. So we're actually spending the same amount per pupil. In fact, usually we're spending more per pupil when a school is smaller, the classrooms aren't full. But we've made it really hard for the school to create the kind of academic environment that they want for their kids. So if you look at, we collect data on how full all of our classrooms are.
Say that again, Eleanor.
We make it hard for the school to create the academic environment they want. To be more specific, we collect data on how full every classroom is, K through 8. And you can see that starting around 5th grade, we have capacity challenges. It's when kids start going to charter schools. It's the point that the superintendent mentioned, that we made all these schools K-8 without shutting down enough middle school capacity. And so what ends up happening is you might have a 7th grader who's sitting in a classroom with, say, 17 or 16 kids. We're actually spending a lot on that student per pupil, but our instructional experts who we have here from the team would say, actually in 7th grade, I'd rather have that kid be in a full classroom, but have access to a great STEM laboratory. But by having a half-full classroom, we've locked up the resources into just a smaller class size, which isn't that strategic for the instructional experts on the team, I think, would agree with. And so what we're trying to do is we actually have, over $20,000 a pupil. We are a leader in the state and the country in how much we spend. We're trying to create the conditions where our schools have the flexibility to create the environment they want for our kids. And a lot of schools have it. We have plenty of schools who've been able to fill their classrooms and have the kind of discretionary resources they want. But we need more of our schools to have that kind of flexibility. And I'm hopeful that the Build BPS work will get us in that direction.
But it is challenging when you have, say, a middle school that either is losing seats or people are just not attending, and they have empty classrooms. And so I go and visit some of these schools, and I'm thinking, we need to be maybe transitioning these students out of this environment to a different environment where they can get more.
Right.
So then the question is, if we're keeping that school afloat because we have to plan and there's unintended consequences, that's also costing us, of course, money and not necessarily delivering the best outcome for the students. or the teachers or the whole school community. And so that's just where my line of questioning is going and grappling with. But I've already gone over my time, I recognize.
Can I add one other comment to that, if I may? I'll try to be brief.
You can.
Consolidating schools isn't about saving money in our budget. We aren't going to save money because of what's happening at the rec. It's about taking the money we have and delivering better resources for kids. So we're taking the money that was spent at the rec and investing more.
Very educational complex.
And spending even more than that on the schools as they'll continue to support their rising 12th graders and on the receiving schools. The money is going to follow the kids and then some. It's about making better use of the resources because they're not spread across too many classrooms or too many schools.
Thank you.
Counselor Edwards?
Thank you, and I'm mindful of time and that Counselor Zeka may have a question.
He said he's all set.
Oh, no, okay. So therefore, for the next hours, no, just kidding. I just had to see your faces.
There you go.
Just had to see your faces. So this is what I will do. Then what I'll try and do now is frame the question that we can follow up on offline with. And if in the framing of my question, you have an answer to it right now, that maybe I'm just confused, then great. If not, then we'll follow up and figure out the question on two things. So this is how I'm trying to understand. With any school or entity that can raise, with schools that have populations that can raise funds, friends of the blah, blah, blah high school, friends of the, whatever, da, 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 that entity can raise money. All right, this is my example. If they can raise that money and that money is used in schools for extracurriculars, for classroom, for classes, for extra classes, I don't know if Italian or Latin classes or robotics or all these other things, if that money is used, and I assume by using that, they're using it to buy the equipment. There's also teacher time being part of that. I don't know if they're paying the teacher's salary, but they're paying for equipment. But ultimately, it's being used in a BPS facility. BPS teacher's probably there. What I mean is there's certain standards that are going to be met when certain things are brought into the classroom. So if that happens, then I'm not quite clear on the controls that BPS has for how much money goes into that class or what kind of equipment they're going to buy. So I'm not clear on that, how much control you have when private entities raise money for certain fun things and educational things in BPS. I'm not quite clear. But I am clear that in many cases you're not yet aware. You won't know until the end of this year on a regular basis going forward how much money entities are able to raise apart from BPS. So it seems that then when I juxtaposition that with the analysis, it seems like there's an opportunity and index analysis happening with transportation, however, when if, again, back to the bus, if folks are able to raise money for that's a school service, which is, I think, still transporting kids is still a service that has certain standards, as you mentioned, then you're going to have to help rectify the controls or lack thereof that you have for that. And it seems like there's controls of equity, no, would not allow, versus we're still doing some analysis and so on and so forth. But and it just seems to be that there's not clarity between even the two departments and how when people can raise money outside, how that's filtered in or not based on equity. We can have that conversation if you want offline, but I am not clear as of right now. The other comment.
Can I just clarify that question, Councillor Edwards, if I may? And yes, I think we should take this offline. But is the question at the core of this, could private fundraising be used to pay for a yellow bus? Is that the core of the question, since private fundraising could be used to bring in a robotics class into a school? I just want to make sure I understand the parallel that you're setting up. Did I hear it correctly?
Correct.
Okay, that's helpful.
Correct.
Okay.
Because I understood that it was not, and then my second point is, and just we can follow up online, you had mentioned a letter with regards to, I'm assuming it's a configuration So I have not actually sent that letter to you. So I'd love to follow up online with who gave you that letter. We have not sent it formally to you at all. So we can follow up online or offline about that,
Absolutely, we'd be happy
because
to.
that was, yeah.
Good. Great.
Great.
Thank you, Superintendent. Thank you, Eleanor, Nate, David. Hope you feel better. John and the entire team. That concludes the FY20 budget BPS overview. Chairman of Ways and Means, and we are here to discuss dockets 0638 through 0640. Message in order authorizing a limit for the Boston Public Schools Revolving Fund for fiscal year 2020 to repair and purchase Boston Public Schools computer technology, including computers, mobile devices, and instructional software. This revolving fund shall be credited with any and all receipts from equipment sales and repair fees for Boston Public Schools technology. Receipts and resulting expenditures from this fund shall not exceed $1 million. Docket 0639. Message in order authorizing a limit for the Boston Public Schools Revolving Fund for fiscal year 2020 to support the maintenance and repair for BPS facilities, including custodial and utility costs for extending building time, floor refinishing, landscaping, and building repairs. Receipts from lease, permit for use, and parking fees for BPS facilities will be deposited in the fund. BPS will be the only unit authorized to expend the fund, and such expenditures shall not exceed $2,600,000. Docket 0640, message in order authorizing a limit for the Boston Public School Revolving Fund for fiscal year 2020 for Boston Public School transportation costs, including bus and public transportation costs. This revolving fund shall be credited with revenue received from Boston Public School Department for the provision of transportation to groups and entities for field trips and activities other than transportation to and from school. Receipts and resulting expenditures from this fund shall not exceed $400,000. I'd like to just remind folks that this is a public hearing, both being broadcast and recorded on Comcast Channel 8, RCN 82, Verizon 1964, and streamed at boston.gov/city-council-TV. Please ask folks to silence their electronic devices. We will take public testimony at the conclusion of the presentation and questions from my colleagues. We ask that you fill out the form left by the door to state your name, address, affiliation, and mark the box if you do wish to testify publicly. This budget review will encompass around 34 hearings over roughly 6 weeks. With that, I'm going to hand it over to you, David, for just explanation of these funds.
Yep. So we have the 3 funds you outlined: technology, facilities, and transportation. Allow the district to take in funds from outside groups for, in the case of technology, sale of used devices primarily, such as teacher laptops, and facilities primarily for rental of BPS facilities in non-school hours for purposes such as after-school programs or community meetings. The revenues are then expended on costs associated with those events in the case of facilities, or additional upkeep of the school that might be required due to the additional use that the building is getting. And in technology, we use it on additional devices and other supports for teachers and students in the Boston Public Schools.
Okay. Just a couple of quick questions.
Yeah.
I believe these funds have gone up with their allowable expenditures. Yes. What can you give me, for example, for the computer technology?
Yeah.
What was it prior to the million?
The computer technology has been more stable. We're seeing a slight increase there as just the cost of computers and therefore the amount we get back goes up a bit. The one that's increased a bit more is facilities, which I believe was closer to 1.5 million 4 or 5 years ago. And what we're seeing there is we've improved our software and sort of consistency in permitting for outside groups to come in. So we're actually doing a better job of collecting the fees that we say we're supposed to be charging. Right. And as a result, we are seeing slightly increased receipts. So that's why we've raised the authorization. Though you can see in your packet, we have not yet come particularly close to hitting our authorized number in facilities. Our goal, though, is if we have a year where the community wants to use our buildings in times when we're not in session, we certainly don't want our lack of authorization from this body to be an obstacle to community engaging with our schools. And we are projecting a slight increase in receipts in the current fiscal year from the prior fiscal year, and we imagine that may continue into school year 19, though well within our authorization.
Great. And then internal controls are always a challenge. Can you speak a little bit to those kinds of controls that I know we've been grappling with for some time?
So what I would say is for each of the different revolving funds, the controls look slightly different. The technology, for example, it tends to be bigger single item purchases, right? So most of the receipts we get come in one big, we sell all of the old teacher laptops at one time, and we take in the $1 million that we're authorized to take in, and it's one big purchase. So in that case, the controls are often set through our procurement law, where we're actually doing a public bid for who wants to buy our laptops, and we're selecting the highest bidder then. To make that purchase for us. For the facilities department, they use a software to do their permitting, and there might be certain occasions where a fee is waived for one reason or another, and so what we were trying to do a better job of, it used to be like a fee was waived and nobody kept track of it, so somebody got 3 phone calls that they owed money after the fee was waived, or people thought the fee was waived and it wasn't, and so somebody who was ready to pay a bill didn't. With this new permitting software, we're able to keep better track of all the permits we've issued, whether there were any waivers that meant that we didn't need to charge for that permit, and where are we in the fee collection from that permit. And then what I'll say is on the other side, we work closely with our facilities department to make sure we're identifying appropriate expenditures to go over onto that. It's unlike technology, it's a little bit more vague exactly the connection between the event, right? It's not like, okay, somebody rented the building on Saturday and they broke something and then we fix it and that's what the money's for. Right. So we're working with them to make sure that if a custodian had to stay overtime and get paid overtime, the overtime for that custodian is being charged to the revolving account and the money that came in from the lease. And we're also working with them to try and make sure that buildings that are seeing more activity are getting increased repairs if they're seeing increased sort of maintenance costs associated with the fact that they're just used. We have some buildings that are basically used 7 days a week because they are a quality building and a quality location, and in that case, they just have more wear and tear.
Great. And again, so most of those costs or those expenditures are for custodian,
Yeah.
maybe being there during the event if it's
Exactly.
an event, and then potentially just maintenance and upkeep for the wear and tear on the building because it gets extra use.
Exactly.
Great. And then the transportation one is kind of self-explanatory.
Yeah.
For field trips, where does that money come from?
You know, I'm not as familiar with the transportation group, but the main receipts, I believe, have to do with non-BPS entities that are paying for field trips.
Okay. Oh, non-BPS entities.
Right. So it's not, so if a school is paying for a field trip, for example, that does not go through the revolving fund.
Gotcha, right.
They can actually directly transfer money to, every school sort of has a field trip allotment.
Yeah, right.
And then if they want something above that, they can transfer money off of their own budget directly to the transportation department without using the revolving account.
Okay.
So this is really for groups that are not internal to BPS.
Okay.
But it allows the transportation department to then be able to send a yellow bus and use a yellow bus to provide that field trip opportunity.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, great. I appreciate your time.
Of course.
Feel better?
Thank you.
This hearing's adjourned.